Is it possible for a Disney film to be a cult classic? For a Goofy movie, that certainly has been the case, as a film made by smaller Disney teams with a fraction of the budget used by movies of the time like The Lion King and Pocahontas. But over the past 30 years, a Goofy movie has managed to become a surprise success, only growing in popularity over the decades, and becoming a fan favorite. On the 30th anniversary of a Goofy movie's release, Not Just a Goof, by directors Christopher Ninus and Eric Kimmelton, digs into the arduous process of making a Goofy movie, the struggle to craft something during Disney's Renaissance period of the 90s, yet still outside of that bubble, and the wild appreciation this film has found in recent years. Not Just a Goof is a loving tribute to a film that is just now finally getting the love it deserves. What's Not Just a Goof about? In the opening minutes of Not Just a Goof, we learn what a Goofy movie means to its two directors. For Ninus, he has a personal connection to this film that meant a lot to him as a kid. But for Kimmelton, in addition to loving the film, his uncle just happens to be Kevin Lima, the director of a Goofy movie. Much of this documentary centers around interviews with Lima and others who worked on the film, but the real treasures here come in Lima's personal collection of VHS tapes from the period, many of which Lima hasn't even watched in 30 years. Ninus and Kimmelton use this footage and interviews to show the uphill battle that it took to create what is essentially a story about a son and his father and trying to give a character like Goofy a meaningful, heartfelt story. Lima walks the audience through this process, with him trying to make a character that's more than just gags, a film that spoke to the time, and attempted to be a John Hughes film in animation. Lima talks about how he grew up without his father, and a Goofy movie was his way of imagining what that type of relationship could be like. Through Lima, we see just how much this story means to him, but we also understand how tough it was to make a Disney-level film that Disney didn't seem to be all that interested in, with a sliver of the resources of the other animated projects coming out at that time. Lima had to work with a smaller team, one spread out across the globe, often having to act out the film for those who don't speak English. At one point, Lima talks about how the usual process of making a Disney animated film is about 4 years, yet they only had 2.5 years, and it's tremendous that they were able to make a feature like this within those limitations. Not Just a Goof works for both the fans and the uninitiated. As one would expect, Not Just a Goof is a treasure trove of information for those who have grown up with this film. The making of footage is especially fascinating, as they're trying to make a Disney film, but attempting something new within that framework. For example, Bill Farmer, the voice of Goofy, is asked to bring more emotion to this inherently wacky character, and we watch him attempt to find these new layers to a character who had been one note for decades. Lima also aimed to get the voice actors to record their lines together as much as possible, and the documentary shows the recording side by side with the film, and we can see the difference this choice makes. Not Just a Goof is particularly interesting in showing the approach to the film's music. Early songs that didn't make the cut, like Made in the Shade and Roxanne, don't have the right spirit that the film would eventually have. Then it feels like we're watching magic happen when Tevin Campbell comes in to record his parts as the film's pop star, Powerline. There's even incredible footage of dancers creating the big musical finale to Eye to Eye in live action to show the animators what the film is looking for. But for those unfamiliar with a Goofy movie, Not Just a Goof is still an effectively compelling documentary as an underdog story trying to make a smaller film in a studio that was experiencing some of the highest highs of its existence. One of the great runners in the film comes from a Goofy movie's team having to come up against the wishes and goals of then Walt Disney Studios chairman, Jeffrey Katzenberg. Sometimes, his suggestions make the film even better, as in the initial pitch when Katzenberg asks where the film's heart is, which sends the team back to the drawing board. Others, like the idea that Goofy shouldn't have his voice and instead be voiced by Steve Martin, tend to put things at a standstill. In a larger sense, Not Just a Goof works as an example of how higher-ups can both improve and hinder an artistic project and how Katzenberg was surprisingly a blessing in disguise before he was fired during the making of a Goofy movie. Not Just a Goof's biggest stumble comes late in the third act, where we see how the film has grown in popularity over the last 30 years. The film spends quite a bit of time showing clips of YouTube reviewers discussing why a Goofy movie is actually underrated, and hitting on all the points that the film has already delved into. Quite frankly, if you're watching Not Just a Goof, odds are, you already know it's underappreciated, and probably don't need several minutes of YouTubers explaining why. While Not Just a Goof begins with the setup for Ninus to explain why a Goofy movie means so much to him, when we finally get to the story in the third act, it's a bit underwhelming, and again, feels like it's hitting on points the film has already made. There's nothing wrong with sharing why you love one of your favorite movies, but the way the film builds up this moment is rather anticlimactic. A Goofy movie remains an understated film in the Disney animated film canon, and Not Just a Goof wonderfully reminds us why this is a film that deserves far more attention than it ever received. While fans will clearly get the most out of this deep dive into this 90s favorite, its structure of a David trying to succeed in a studio of Goliaths is worth it even for non-fans. Not Just a Goof gives this often forgotten gem of Disney the love and respect it deserves after all these years. Not Just a Goof is streaming on Disney Plus now. Give Not Just a Goof a 8/10.